To another piece of land openly coveted by Donald Trump, Greenland. The U.S. Vice President JD Vance has made a controversial one-day visit to the Danish territory. Speaking at a U.S. military base on the Arctic island, he accused Denmark of not doing enough to keep the people of Greenland safe from China and Russia.
An unwelcome visitor arrives in Greenland. JD Vance's trip to the Danish territory is seen by many as provocative, after President Donald Trump repeatedly threatened to take this strategically important region into America's orbit. At a news conference, Vance launched into one of his now familiar attacks on long-standing American allies.
The message to Denmark is very simple. You have not done a good job by the people of Greenland. You have underinvested in the people of Greenland, and you have underinvested in the security architecture of this incredible, beautiful landmass filled with incredible people. That has to change.
Vance's visit was confined to the US military base on the island and away from vexed Greenlanders, 85% of whom are against any type of US takeover.
Come and look at what we have to offer, but you can't buy us.
Even though we're not a warlike people, if Trump wants to continue having a military base here, then he can pay a bit of rent.
Just hours before the US Vice President arrived in Greenland, politicians agreed to form a four-party coalition after weeks of negotiations. The new Prime Minister, Jens Frederik Nielsen, had some choice words about Vance's decision to come to Greenland.
Well, JD Vance is landing at a facility that is their own. I thought this whole situation of coming to visit where there's no sitting government is not showing respect for an ally. I thought that was a shame.
The trip was scaled back from the original plans to tour the island, following a spat over the lack of an invitation. But despite strained relations, while the VP was posing for a group photo, Vance's boss in Washington, once again, claimed the US needs to take control of Greenland for world peace.
Sophie Arts is a fellow with the German Marshal Fund in Washington, D.C. Sophie, is JD Vance right when he says that Denmark has done a poor job protecting Greenland?
Thanks so much for having me. Definitely think these statements are not a fair and not accurate representation of Denmark's overall support of Greenland over the longer term, as well as its defense support. Denmark, of course, supports more than 50% of Greenland's overall budget, and that doesn't, of course, include the military support that it has greatly increased, also along with other European allies, has greatly increased its overall defense spending and plans to continue to do that. And it's also really increased its Arctic-specific defense spending, and it recently announced that it would increase its spending by $2 billion earlier this year, which is a 10-fold increase, and wants to continue increasing it further. So the claim that Denmark has left the defense of Greenland to the United States is simply not true. Of course, the US has its northernmost base there, as you've just emphasized, and that's the base that Vice President Vance visited today, the Pituffik Space Base, which was built following a 1951 defense agreement between Denmark and the United States. And this base is really critically important for US homeland defense as well as for NATO defense. And it is not a base to protect Greenland itself, even though you can, of course, argue that it also enhances Greenland's deterrence. But I think it's fair to say that it benefits the United States more than it benefits Greenland, because it's critically important for missile defense and missile warning, because Greenland's territory is right in between the path between Russia and the US mainland, and the path that Russia could potentially fire missiles from.
Right. Sophie, real quick, can I interrupt here? Can I just ask, does the White House then not have a point when it says that the sensitivity of Greenland's position has become more and more apparent and more incumbent upon the U.S. to do something, given its positioning and the opening up of the Arctic?
No, I think there is nuance here. I think the U.S. and Vice President Vance, as he today emphasized, is certainly correct in emphasizing that the Arctic is becoming more contested and that there's a growing threat primarily from Russia, but also increasingly from China, which has defined itself as near Arctic state a few years ago, and which is really trying to increase its presence and access in the broader Arctic region, and specifically also collaborating with Russia a lot in the Arctic to attain that. But I think there's a difference here in that it is not specifically Greenland that is susceptible to this threat from Russia and China, but the broader Arctic region more broadly, and that the U.S. presence in Greenland, which already has a long history of collaboration with the Kingdom of Denmark, with both Denmark and Greenland, is really enhancing deterrence against Russia and China. And any argument against this alliance, anything that calls this into question, really seems to call into question the broader deterrence against Russia and China as well. So I think it's a cross purpose here.
The U.S. and Denmark are traditionally close allies. Denmark, for example, played a rather outsized role in the U.S.-led war in Afghanistan when you look at American allies. Why then does the U.S. believe it needs to pry Greenland away if, for example, Denmark is bolstering defense spending, as you said, for the territory?
Yeah, I think that's not quite clear to me and a lot of people who are quite familiar with the role that the U.S. has in Greenland, because it really has the access and the agreement that would enable it to further enhance its access. And it really doesn't need any further military control over Greenland to achieve that. So I think there's some real questions here as to why the United States keeps continuing this, what is perceived rather aggressive rhetoric towards Greenland, and today, as we've seen specifically with regard to Denmark, in a way that really seems to try to drive a wedge between Denmark and Greenland.
All right. That's Sophie Arts of the German Marshal Fund. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.